When we talk about the great transformations in modern pop culture, few stories are as dramatic, as divisive, and as fascinating as that of Miley Cyrus. But before the controversies, the reinventions, and the cultural debates, there was a young girl from Tennessee with a dream that would soon collide with the massive machinery of Disney and turn her into one of the most recognizable faces in the world. To understand Miley's transformation, we have to start at the beginning, with a little girl born into a family already steeped in music and entertainment. Destiny Hope Cyrus entered the world on November 23, 1992, in Franklin, Tennessee. Her name, Destiny Hope, was chosen with purpose. Her parents believed she was destined for greatness, and the name reflected their confidence that she would bring hope and light into the world. Growing up, she quickly earned the nickname The Smiley because of her infectious grin and bubbly personality. That name, shortened to Miley, would stick, eventually becoming her official stage name and later her legal name. Her father, Billy Ray Cyrus, was already a country music star, best known for his 1992 smash hit Lakey, Breaky Heart. This meant that young Miley grew up around fame, studios, and the music business. But unlike many children of celebrities, Miley didn't merely bask in the reflected glow of her father's career, she wanted her own stage, her own spotlight. Even as a child, she seemed drawn to performance, whether it was singing along at home, acting out skits for her family, or simply captivating people with her charisma. Her mother, Tish Cyrus, played an equally important role. While Billy Ray embodied the world of music, Tish grounded the family and nurtured Miley's creative drive. It wasn't long before Miley began acting, taking small roles that hinted at her ambitions. One of her earliest appearances came in her father's television series Doc, where she appeared alongside him. She also had a small role in Tim Burton's Big Fish. But these were just glimpses, stepping stones on the way to something much bigger. The true turning point came when Disney Channel began casting for a new series in the early 2000s. They were searching for someone who could act, sing, and charm audiences, a young performer who could embody both a relatable teenager and a pop superstar. Miley auditioned, initially for the role of the best friend. But the producers quickly realized something: this girl wasn't meant for the sidelines. She had the spark, the charisma, the energy that could carry an entire show. After multiple rounds of auditions, rejections, and second chances, Miley landed the role that would change her life forever: Miley Stewart, the lead character in Hannah Montana. The premise of the show was simple yet powerful: an ordinary teenage girl living a double life as a secret pop star. It was a clever concept that mirrored Miley's real life, an ordinary kid from Tennessee suddenly thrust into stardom. When Hannah Montana premiered in 2006, it became an instant sensation. The show wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon. Children and teenagers around the world tuned in to follow Miley Stewart's adventures, while simultaneously falling in love with the music of her alter ego, Hannah Montana. The dual identity became a powerful selling point. Fans could relate to Miley Stewart, the awkward, relatable high school student, while idolizing Hannah Montana, the glamorous pop star. Behind the scenes, the Disney machine worked overtime to capitalize on the show's success. Concert tours, merchandise, albums, and movies followed in rapid succession. The Hannah Montana soundtrack sold millions of copies, with Miley's voice at the center of it all. By the age of 14, she was not just a Disney star, she was a global brand. For Miley, this was both a dream come true and the beginning of a complicated relationship with fame. On one hand, she adored performing. She loved the thrill of the stage, the connection with fans, and the chance to live out her passion. On the other, the pressures of balancing her identity with that of Hannah Montana created cracks that would only grow larger with time. The Disney system was polished, precise, and demanding. Miley wasn't just playing a role, she was selling an image of innocence, wholesomeness, and family-friendly perfection. Off-screen, however, she was still just a teenager, going through all the awkward changes and struggles that come with adolescence. Every mistake, every slip, every sign of rebellion was magnified under the harsh glare of the spotlight. Still, in those early years, Miley delivered exactly what Disney needed. She was charming, talented, and seemingly effortless in her ability to switch between the girl next door and the glittering pop star. Her concert sold out. Hannah Montana, the movie in 2009, was a box office hit. Miley Stewart wasn't just a character, she was an icon of an entire generation's childhood. But behind that success lay the seeds of transformation. Miley wasn't content to be Hannah Montana forever. She admired artists who broke boundaries, who pushed themselves beyond the roles others wrote for them. And as she grew older, she began to question how much of her life was truly hers. Was she living as Miley Cyrus, or was she trapped in the shadow of Hannah Montana? The birth of Miley Cyrus the pop star began here, in the halls of Disney, in the glittering blonde wig of Hannah Montana, and in the millions of screaming fans who adored her. But as we will see, the brighter the spotlight shines, the deeper the shadows it casts. Because while the world saw a smiling teen idol, inside Miley Cyrus, a transformation was already beginning. When Hannah Montana premiered on the Disney Channel in 2006, no one, not even the people behind the show, could have predicted the cultural juggernaut it would become. The premise was simple, almost innocent in its construction: a young girl living the life of an ordinary teenager by day, while secretly transforming into an international pop sensation by night. But for Miley Cyrus, this wasn't just a storyline. It became her reality, her persona, and eventually, her cage. The series rocketed her to superstardom practically overnight. Young fans across the globe latched onto the character of Miley Stewart, the relatable teenager navigating high school awkwardness, while simultaneously idolizing Hannah Montana, the glamorous pop star living a dream life on stage. It was a duality that resonated deeply with its audience. Children could see themselves in the girl with the messy room, the crushes, and the everyday struggles, while fantasizing about the sparkly costumes, sold-out concerts, and the spotlight of fame. But behind the carefully constructed image was Miley herself, a teenager whose personal identity was increasingly becoming blurred with that of her character. The show wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. Within a year, Hannah Montana merchandise dominated toy aisles, Miley's face graced every magazine cover for kids and tweens, and the soundtrack album sold millions of copies worldwide. Concert tours under the Hannah Montana brand sold out arenas in minutes, and Miley's name became synonymous with Disney Channel's golden era. By 2007, she wasn't just a star, she was the star, one of the most recognizable faces in the world, and the driving force behind a multi-billion-dollar empire. But the double-edged sword of this fame was already sharpening. Disney had meticulously crafted the Hannah Montana brand to appeal to an audience that wanted wholesome, family-friendly entertainment. Miley, however, was still growing up. As a real teenager entering adolescence, she began to feel the inevitable tug between who she truly was and who the world expected her to be. Every public appearance, every interview, every performance was scrutinized, not just as Miley Cyrus, but as Hannah Montana, the role model. The pressure was immense. To the millions of young fans, Hannah Montana was flawless, cheerful, and endlessly kind. But Miley, as a human being, was not immune to frustration, rebellion, and the desire to express herself outside of the boundaries Disney had drawn for her. And yet, at that time, any step she took beyond the squeaky clean image of Hannah was met with shock, judgment, or outright condemnation. It was as though she wasn't allowed to be a normal teenager, because her adolescence was playing out on the world stage. Behind the scenes, Miley's grueling schedule only amplified this struggle. Filming the show consumed countless hours, leaving little room for rest or a private life. Add to that the relentless touring, promotional appearances, and rehearsals, and what emerged was a portrait of a young star burdened by the weight of an empire on her shoulders. While most teenagers worried about exams or prom dates, Miley was balancing billion-dollar brand expectations, live performances, and an audience that demanded she remain the perfect pop princess at all times. Her family, particularly her father Billy Ray Cyrus, tried to shield her from the darker side of fame, but they too became entangled in the machinery of the Disney empire. Billy Ray himself even appeared in Hannah Montana as her on-screen dad, further blurring the line between fiction and reality. For Miley, there was often no distinction between her personal life and her professional obligations. Work wasn't something she could walk away from when the cameras stopped rolling. It followed her home, it lived in her family, and it defined her every waking moment. Despite these pressures, Miley delivered on every front. Her performances were magnetic, her energy infectious, and her ability to embody both Miley Stewart and Hannah Montana captivated audiences for 4 seasons. Yet, deep inside, she knew she was living under a mask. As she would later describe in interviews, Hannah Montana became less of a character she played and more of a second skin she couldn't peel away. Everywhere she went, fans expected her to be Hannah, to embody that bright, glittery, idealized version of a young girl's dream. And as the years went on, the conflict between the character and the real Miley only grew stronger. By the time she reached her late teens, the role that had catapulted her into fame began to feel suffocating. The very double identity that had charmed audiences around the world became her personal paradox. Miley wanted to grow up, to explore more mature themes, to test her boundaries as an artist and as a woman. But Disney, and indeed the entire public, seemed determined to keep her frozen in time as Hannah Montana, the perpetual teenager, the forever pop princess. As the final seasons of the show aired, the tension was palpable. Miley's interviews hinted at her growing restlessness, her desire to break free, her need to establish her own voice outside of the Disney machine. She began experimenting with fashion, with edgier looks that drew media attention and occasionally backlash. Tabloids were quick to pounce on any sign of rebellion, framing her choices not as normal teenage exploration, but as the beginning of a downward spiral. In truth, Miley wasn't spiraling, she was evolving. She was doing what every young person does, trying to understand who she was, beyond the roles assigned to her. But the stakes were higher for her, and every move was broadcast to the world. By the time Hannah Montana ended in 2011, Miley was at a crossroads. She had conquered the world as a child star, amassed a fortune, and become a household name, but at what cost? The double life that had defined her teenage years left her with a profound identity crisis. Was she Miley Cyrus, the daughter of Billy Ray, the girl from Tennessee? Was she Hannah Montana, the fictional icon that Disney had created and the world had embraced? Or was she something else entirely, an artist waiting to emerge from the shadows of both personas? What became clear was this: the end of Hannah Montana was not the end of Miley's story. It was the beginning of a new, tumultuous, and daring chapter. One where she would strip away the layers of the Disney image, break the mold of what the world thought she should be, and begin the long, complicated journey of reinventing herself. But the world wasn't ready for what Miley Cyrus was about to unleash. As the final seasons of Hannah Montana drew to a close, a storm was brewing behind the scenes. Miley Cyrus, who had carried the weight of Disney's brightest franchise for half a decade, was no longer the same wide-eyed teenager who first stepped into the spotlight. She was growing, evolving, and searching for something more authentic than the carefully manufactured bubble Disney had built around her. For millions of fans, Miley was still the blonde wig-wearing girl who lived a secret double life on television. But for Miley herself, that world was beginning to feel like a cage, one that confined her identity, her artistry, and even her sense of self. The pressure to maintain the wholesome Disney image was immense. The studio had invested millions into her as a brand, not just as an actress. Her face appeared on lunchboxes, dolls, clothing lines, and endless streams of merchandise. Every move she made off-camera risked tarnishing the empire that Disney had built. And yet, behind the glittering curtain, Miley was already pushing against those invisible walls. She knew that she could not spend her entire career being Hannah. At some point, she had to take off the wig, not just on screen, but in life. This desire to step away was not just about career growth, it was about survival. Many Disney stars before her had struggled to transition out of the network's shadow. Some were forgotten, others were criticized for failing to escape their child star image. Miley refused to let that happen. She was determined to redefine herself, even if the process was messy, controversial, and painful. And so began her conscious, calculated, and often shocking breakaway from the Disney mold. One of the first signs of this transformation came in 2009, when Miley released her hit single Party in the USA. It was still catchy, pop-driven and accessible, but it carried with it a newfound confidence. The song's success cemented Miley as more than just a character on television. It introduced her as a standalone pop star. But even then, critics wondered, was she truly her own artist, or was this just Disney repackaging her into another product? For Miley, the answer would have to come with greater risk. That risk came in the form of her 2010 film The Last Song. Based on a Nicholas Sparks novel, the film was meant to be her first serious step into adult acting. On set, she also met Australian actor Liam Hemsworth, who would later become one of the most defining figures in her personal and public life. The Last Song was not just another project, it was Miley's declaration that she was no longer just Hannah Montana. She was an actress, a musician, and a young woman ready to be taken seriously. But shedding Disney's shadow was never going to be easy. Around this time, Miley faced intense media scrutiny. Paparazzi followed her every move, dissecting her clothing, her relationships, and even her posture. When photos surfaced of her wearing more revealing outfits or behaving in ways considered too adult, tabloids wasted no time labeling her as a rebellious teen spiraling out of control. For a young woman barely out of her teens, this public dissection was brutal. But Miley refused to conform to what was expected of her. She leaned into the chaos, using controversy as fuel to distance herself further from the pristine Disney image. Her 2010 album Can't Be Tamed was the clearest sign yet that Miley was not looking back. The music video for the title track featured her dressed in dark, edgy costumes, locked inside a giant bird cage before breaking free. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. This was Miley's declaration of independence. She was tired of being caged, tired of playing a role, tired of living under an image that was not truly hers. Critics were divided, some praised her boldness, while others condemned her for ruining the image of Hannah Montana. But for Miley, that was the point. She wasn't trying to please everyone anymore. She was trying to find herself. At the same time, this transition revealed the immense double standard faced by young women in the entertainment industry. Male stars who grew up on Disney were allowed to evolve without constant ridicule. But for Miley, every haircut, every outfit, every lyric became a headline. When she experimented with bolder performances, she was accused of being a bad influence on children. The irony, of course, was that those children were growing up too, just like Miley was. Yet the world struggled to let go of the Hannah Montana image, clinging to it as if Miley owed them perpetual innocence. Her struggle wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Miley herself has admitted in later interviews that growing up as Hannah Montana left her with an identity crisis. She had spent years living as both Miley and Hannah, so much so that at times, she wasn't sure where the character ended and where she began. Breaking away from Disney wasn't just about her career, it was about reclaiming her sense of self. And yet, for all the backlash, Miley's evolution was working. Her name was everywhere, her music was selling, and her public persona was transforming into something undeniably unique. She was no longer just a former Disney star, she was Miley Cyrus, unpredictable, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. By the time Hannah Montana officially ended in 2011, Miley had already made it clear that she was done with that chapter of her life. The farewell episode was emotional for fans, but for Miley, it was liberating. She had outgrown the role, and while she would always carry Hannah Montana as part of her legacy, she was ready to write a new story, one that the world might not have expected, but one that was entirely hers. The end of Disney was not the end of Miley Cyrus. In fact, it was only the beginning. The world had seen her as a child star and a teenage idol. Now, they were about to witness her most daring transformation yet. Because leaving behind Hannah Montana wasn't just about closing a door. It was about stepping through another one, into a future that was wild, unpredictable, and entirely on her terms. The year was 2013, and Miley Cyrus was no longer interested in playing it safe. No longer satisfied with simply shedding her Disney image through subtle reinvention, she catapulted herself into an entirely new stratosphere of pop culture. This was the era of Bangerz, the period where Miley made it explicitly clear, the girl the world once knew as Hannah Montana was gone for good. The transformation wasn't gradual anymore, it was explosive, disruptive, and impossible to ignore. And in the center of this firestorm was Miley herself, orchestrating every move like an artist both liberated and defiant. The seeds of the Bangerz era had been planted years earlier. Miley had spent her late teenage years testing boundaries, showing glimpses of a rebellious side, her Vanity Fair photo shoot, the leaked candid moments that outraged parents, and the 2009 scandal when she performed a pole dancing routine at the Teen Choice Awards. But in 2013, those hints coalesced into a full-throttle artistic declaration. With Bangerz, Miley wasn't just breaking the mold, she was smashing it into pieces. The album, released in October 2013, was a bold departure from her earlier pop country roots. Collaborating with producers like Mike Will Made It, Pharrell Williams, and will.i.am, Miley embraced hip-hop and trap influences, creating a soundscape that was gritty, unapologetic, and deliberately provocative. Songs like We Can't Stop and Wrecking Ball weren't just hits, they were cultural events. We Can't Stop became a party anthem about self-indulgence and rebellion, while Wrecking Ball stripped away the bravado to reveal raw vulnerability. But beyond the music, it was Miley's visuals, performances, and image that set the world ablaze. Who can forget the 2013 MTV Video Music Awards? Miley stormed the stage in a performance that would become one of the most infamous in award show history. Clad in a flesh-colored latex bikini, she twerked alongside Robin Thicke, wagging her tongue and grinding with an audacity that left viewers stunned. Social media exploded overnight. Parents called it vulgar. Commentators declared the death of childhood innocence. But for Miley, this was the point. She had no intention of fading into obscurity or remaining trapped in the pristine packaging of a former child star. If shock was what it took to reclaim her identity, then shock would be her weapon. The backlash was immediate and intense. Headlines questioned her sanity. Think pieces flooded the internet about the dangers of young female stars going too far. Critics accused her of cultural appropriation, pointing to her use of twerking and hip-hop aesthetics as exploitative. It seemed as though the entire world had an opinion about Miley Cyrus. But while some recoiled, others applauded her bravery. For every critic calling her a train wreck, there were fans celebrating her refusal to conform. Yet beneath the controversy, the music spoke for itself. Bangerz debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, selling hundreds of thousands of copies in its first week. Wrecking Ball not only topped charts worldwide but also cemented itself as one of the most iconic ballads of the decade. Its music video, featuring Miley swinging naked on a wrecking ball, was shocking, yes, but it was also hauntingly symbolic of destruction, vulnerability, and raw pain. It reminded audiences that Miley's artistry was not just about provocation, it was about telling her truth in the loudest, most uncompromising way possible. But the chaos of the Bangerz era wasn't confined to music. Miley's personal life became just as much a part of the narrative. Her on-again, off-again relationship with actor Liam Hemsworth, who she had been engaged to in 2012 before calling it off in 2013, was fodder for tabloids. Many interpreted Bangerz as Miley's breakup album, a cathartic response to heartbreak and loss. Her image, short blonde pixie cut, bold makeup, flamboyant outfits, reflected a woman breaking away from not just Disney but from expectations in every sense. She was redefining herself not only as an artist but also as a woman navigating love, pain, and freedom. The Bangerz tour only amplified this reinvention. It was outrageous, theatrical, and unabashedly sexual, featuring giant inflatable hot dogs, backup dancers dressed as cartoon characters, and plenty of tongue-in-cheek humor. It wasn't just a concert, it was a spectacle designed to provoke. Parents may have shielded their children's eyes, but arenas were still packed, proving that controversy sells, and that Miley had tapped into something visceral. She was giving voice to a generation eager to break free from constraints, even if it meant scandalizing the older ones. What made the Bangerz era so fascinating was its duality. On one hand, it was all shock factor, tongue-wagging, and provocation. On the other, it was deeply personal. Miley was grappling with heartbreak, fame, and the crushing pressure of public opinion. In interviews, she made it clear that she wasn't spiraling out of control, as some assumed, but was intentionally taking charge of her narrative. To her, Bangerz was empowerment, a reclamation of her voice. The world might have seen chaos, but she saw liberation. And yet, the era wasn't without consequences. The criticism of cultural appropriation lingered, and for some, the provocative antics overshadowed the artistry of the music. Even within the industry, opinions were divided. Was Miley a genius provocateur, or was she a former child star burning too bright, too fast? The debate raged on, but one thing was undeniable: she was no longer Hannah Montana. She was Miley Cyrus, and she had the world's full attention. As the dust settled from the whirlwind of Bangerz, Miley stood at a crossroads once again. She had succeeded in destroying the Disney image, but the question remained: what would rise from the ashes of that wrecking ball? The answer would unfold in the years to come, as Miley continued her evolution, shifting sounds, styles, and even personas. The Bangerz era was not the end, but rather the beginning of an artist who would never stop transforming, no matter how much it rattled the world around her. The fallout from the Bangerz era was swift and unforgiving. For every fan who applauded Miley Cyrus for her bold reinvention, there were critics who lambasted her for abandoning the wholesome image she had built during her Disney days. News outlets ran endless commentary about her performances, questioning whether her antics were genuine expressions of artistry or calculated attempts to remain relevant. The 2013 MTV Video Music Awards performance with Robin Thicke, in particular, became the defining image of this backlash. The foam finger, the suggestive dancing, the tongue-wagging, it all became a cultural lightning rod. For months afterward, Miley Cyrus was not just an artist, she was a headline, dissected by late-night comedians, news pundits, and parents concerned about her influence on young fans. But beneath the shock value and the media frenzy, there was an undeniable sense of purpose in Miley's transformation. She was not simply rebelling for the sake of rebellion. Rather, she was attempting to wrestle with questions of identity, artistry, and control. For so long, the image of Hannah Montana had been a cage, a glittering, golden cage, but a cage nonetheless. Now, she was breaking free, even if that freedom came at the cost of public approval. The backlash was painful, but for Miley, it was also a crucible. It forced her to ask herself, who am I when the wigs, the costumes, and the carefully crafted personas fall away? Her next moves reflected this struggle. After the whirlwind of Bangerz, Miley shifted toward projects that leaned more experimental, more intimate, and far less commercial. She collaborated with the Flaming Lips, embracing psychedelic rock influences and staging bizarre, kaleidoscopic performances that confounded mainstream audiences but resonated with a growing cult fan base. Her 2015 album Miley Cyrus Her Dead Pets, released for free online, was a rejection of the music industry's commercial machinery. It was messy, sprawling, and deeply personal, an unapologetic act of creative exploration that showed she was no longer chasing chart success, but rather artistic authenticity. This willingness to risk alienating her audience for the sake of growth defined Miley's post-Disney evolution. While many dismissed Dead Pets as self-indulgent, others saw it as the work of an artist refusing to be boxed in. The very act of releasing the album outside traditional industry norms was a statement: Miley was no longer playing by the rules, and she was fine with the consequences. At the same time, she began using her platform for activism. With the founding of the Happy Hippie Foundation in 2014, Miley focused on supporting homeless youth and LGBTQ+ communities. Her philanthropy revealed a side of her that was often overshadowed by the headlines about her performances. She was outspoken about issues that mattered to her, willing to endure the criticism that came with mixing celebrity and activism. For Miley, artistry was not just about music, it was about impact. Of course, this period was not without its contradictions. For every socially conscious statement she made, there were controversies that reignited backlash. Critics accused her of cultural appropriation, particularly for her use of hip-hop aesthetics and imagery during the Bangerz era. This criticism struck at the heart of a larger conversation about race, privilege, and the responsibility of artists in positions of power. Miley herself would later acknowledge and distance herself from some of those choices, admitting that she had made mistakes in her attempt to reinvent herself. The very public nature of her growth meant that her missteps were amplified, scrutinized, and preserved in the collective memory of pop culture. Yet, through it all, there was a pattern emerging. Miley was not afraid to burn down her image and rebuild it from scratch. Every reinvention came with risks, every experiment invited criticism, but she seemed undeterred. If anything, the backlash only fueled her determination to prove that she was more than just a former child star. Her performances during this time reflected that duality, one moment chaotic and outrageous, the next stripped down and vulnerable. Appearances on shows like Saturday Night Live showcased her raw vocal talent, reminding audiences that beneath the theatrics, Miley was a powerhouse singer. In quieter moments, such as acoustic renditions of classics, she revealed the depth of her artistry, proving that she was more than the sum of her controversies. This era of backlash and exploration can be seen as the middle chapter in her transformation. It was the part of the story where the protagonist stumbles, faces resistance, and confronts their own flaws. For Miley, it was the process of unlearning the habits of a manufactured identity and replacing them with something real, something authentic. She was learning, failing, growing, and re-emerging, not just as a performer, but as a woman who refused to be defined by other people's expectations. The Miley Cyrus of this time was complicated, contradictory, and constantly in flux. But in many ways, that was the point. She was showing the world that growth is not a straight line, it's messy, imperfect, and often uncomfortable. And though the backlash was harsh, it laid the groundwork for what would come next, a reinvention that would balance shock with sincerity, experimentation with mainstream appeal. Miley's journey was far from over. The controversies had left scars, but they had also carved out space for her to redefine herself yet again. And as the dust settled from the storm of Bangerz and its aftermath, a new chapter was waiting to be written, one that would see her embrace both her rebellious spirit and her undeniable talent in ways that surprised even her harshest critics. After the chaos and noise of the Bangerz era, and the intense spotlight of the controversies that followed, Miley Cyrus found herself at a crossroads. The larger-than-life persona she had created, loud, rebellious, unapologetic, had served its purpose. It tore her free from the Disney mold and made sure the world could no longer see her as Hannah Montana. But with the dust settling and her career moving into a new phase, Miley began to crave something different. She was older now, more reflective, and more grounded. And perhaps most importantly, she was beginning to seek peace. That shift, both personally and artistically, came to light with the release of her 2017 single, Malibu. The song, which she wrote about her then relationship with actor Liam Hemsworth, was a radical departure from the provocative pop anthems and raucous performances that had defined her in previous years. Malibu was gentle, airy, and tender, a song about love, vulnerability, and the grounding comfort of returning to nature and home. Its breezy guitars and soft production immediately caught audiences off guard. Where was the shock? The spectacle? The outrageous headlines? Instead, here was Miley with sunlit vocals and heartfelt lyrics, singing about a love that gave her stability. For many, Malibu felt like the unveiling of a new Miley, one who was stepping into maturity without abandoning her individuality. It wasn't a rebranding in the sense of calculated PR, but more of a natural evolution. Miley had lived through the extremes of fame, indulgence, and rebellion, and now she wanted to show the world a more introspective side. Her performances during this era reflected that change. Gone were the twerking routines and the oversized props, in their place was a more stripped-back, authentic presence. She was smiling on stage, barefoot in white dresses, letting the music speak instead of the shock value. This wasn't just an artistic shift. It was personal. Around this time, Miley had reconciled with Hemsworth after years of on-again, off-again turbulence. Their rekindled relationship seemed to influence the more grounded and hopeful tone of her work. For years, the media had painted their romance as unstable, fueled by youth and passion but doomed by fame. Yet in this chapter, Miley's music suggested a sense of peace, a belief that she had finally found someone who understood her fully, someone who anchored her in the storm of celebrity life. Malibu was, in many ways, a love letter not just to Liam but to the idea of stability itself. The maturity in Malibu extended into the rest of her 2017 album, Younger Now. The record leaned heavily on influences from folk, country, and pop rock, genres that connected to her roots growing up in Nashville. Songs like Younger Now and Rainbowland, a duet with her godmother, Dolly Parton, showcased a more reflective Miley, one who was thinking about the cycles of life, about growth, and about embracing positivity after years of chaos. While the album didn't achieve the same commercial dominance as Bangerz, it marked a significant point in her journey. It was the sound of an artist learning to breathe again. But it wasn't just about the music. Miley's public image was also shifting. She began to distance herself from the controversies that had once defined her. She acknowledged in interviews that while she didn't regret her past, she no longer needed to be defined by shock tactics. She openly spoke about outgrowing certain habits, leaving behind excessive partying, and focusing on her health. Fans who had once worried about her spiraling saw these changes as a welcome sign that Miley was finally coming into her own. Still, it would be naive to think that this transition was without complications. Critics were quick to accuse Miley of abandoning the culture she had embraced during the Bangerz years. Conversations about appropriation resurfaced, with some questioning whether her pivot to a softer, more country-inspired sound was a retreat into a safer, more traditionally palatable image. Miley addressed these criticisms candidly, admitting that she was still figuring herself out. Her honesty, even when messy, was part of what made her transformation so fascinating to watch. She wasn't a polished product of Hollywood's machine, she was a young woman growing in front of millions. What stood out most during this era was the vulnerability. For the first time in years, Miley wasn't playing a character, whether it was Hannah Montana, the rebellious Bangerz star, or the psychedelic adventurer of her experimental projects. She was simply Miley, sharing her truth through music that reflected her emotions. Songs like Inspired, which she dedicated to her father Billy Cyrus and to her passion for environmental activism, revealed a sincerity that reminded audiences of the girl who had first won their hearts back in 2006. Her performances of Malibu on major stages, like the Billboard Music Awards and The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, were defining moments of this softer era. Stripped of gimmicks, they showed a Miley who didn't need shock value to command attention. Her voice carried the weight, her presence radiated authenticity. It was a reminder that beneath all the headlines and transformations, Miley Cyrus had always been a remarkable talent. In hindsight, this chapter of Miley's life feels like a pause in the chaos, a moment of balance before the storm that would inevitably return. It was a period defined by love, by a search for stability, and by an artist daring to be vulnerable in a world that had grown used to her rebellion. And while it may not have been her most commercially successful era, it was one of her most important. It allowed Miley to prove that she wasn't locked into any one identity, she could evolve, adapt, and grow, even if that meant taking a quieter, more reflective path. As the sun set on the Younger Now era, Miley stood as an artist in transition, one foot in the simplicity of Malibu's shores and the other inching toward the complexities of adulthood and the challenges of fame that would once again test her. The softer side she revealed would remain a part of her, even as the years ahead pushed her back into the headlines for reasons both triumphant and tragic. Yet behind the shifting personas, behind the glittering stages and bold reinventions, there was still a young woman fighting private battles that the public only ever glimpsed through headlines and paparazzi snapshots. For Miley Cyrus, fame was never a shield, it was a magnifying glass. Every stumble, every heartbreak, every moment of vulnerability was projected onto the world stage, dissected, judged, and mocked. And as her artistry grew more fearless, her personal life often seemed to unravel in equal measure. One of the defining aspects of Miley's journey has been her openness about personal struggles, particularly her battles with mental health, loss, and the lingering effects of growing up under such extreme public scrutiny. Her relationship with fame itself became complicated. On one hand, she craved the freedom to express herself without boundaries, but on the other, she was constantly forced to reckon with how that freedom was framed by the media. It wasn't simply about being a pop star anymore, it was about being a cultural figure whose every choice was seen as a moral statement, a rebellion, or a fall from grace. At the center of her personal struggles was her long, on-again, off-again relationship with actor Liam Hemsworth. The two met in 2009 on the set of The Last Song, a romantic drama that mirrored the whirlwind of feelings between them. Their romance became a Hollywood fixation, two young stars, beautiful and seemingly destined to be together. But just like Miley herself, the relationship was anything but simple. Breakups, reconciliations, rumors, and public speculation followed them for nearly a decade. When they finally married in December of 2018, many fans believed it was a full-circle moment, the fairytale ending to years of turbulence. But the fairytale didn't last. Less than a year later, in 2019, Miley and Liam announced their separation, and the media frenzy was immediate. Every song she released, every public appearance, every word on social media was interpreted as a hidden message about the breakup. For Miley, this period was both devastating and liberating. It was the collapse of a long-held love, but it was also an opportunity to truly redefine herself, not as someone's partner, not as someone's scandal, but as an individual. Still, the pain was undeniable, and she never shied away from acknowledging how much it shaped her. At the same time, Miley faced struggles with substance use, something she has spoken about candidly in interviews. She admitted to using alcohol and drugs as a form of escapism, a way to cope with the pressures of fame and the chaos of her personal life. But with equal honesty, she discussed her path toward sobriety, relapses, and the ongoing nature of that battle. Unlike the carefully managed Disney star who once had to project a squeaky clean image, Miley the adult artist let the world see the mess, the rawness, and the humanity behind the celebrity facade. But struggles extended beyond relationships and substance use. Miley also experienced significant loss, most notably the destruction of her Malibu home in the 2018 wildfires. The home was not just a property, it was a sanctuary, a space where she had built memories, written songs, and found a sense of grounding. Losing it so suddenly was another reminder of the instability that seemed to follow her life, no matter how high she rose in her career. In interviews, she reflected on how that loss changed her perspective, making her more aware of impermanence, both in material things and in life itself. Miley's challenges were not always personal, sometimes, they were the product of being a woman in the music industry, scrutinized for every choice in ways male counterparts rarely were. While her male peers could reinvent themselves freely, Miley was often chastised for being too wild, too sexual, or too outrageous. Critics called her unstable, while others accused her of cultural appropriation during her Bangerz era. These criticisms were not without complexity, and Miley herself later admitted to mistakes in how she presented herself and engaged with other cultures. But the backlash was a storm that few could weather without scars, and Miley bore hers openly. Through these struggles, however, one thing remained constant: her resilience. Each heartbreak, each mistake, each loss, seemed to fold back into her art. Her albums became personal diaries set to music, from the aching vulnerability of Younger Now to the reflective maturity of Plastic Hearts. Even in the face of scandal, she wielded her voice as both weapon and balm, channeling pain into creativity and finding strength in the very vulnerability that once made her a target. What's remarkable is how Miley never fully retreated into silence or exile. Unlike some stars who disappeared entirely under the weight of public scrutiny, she stayed raw, unfiltered, and brutally honest. She turned interviews into confessions, music videos into personal statements, and performances into declarations of survival. This willingness to be transparent about her flaws and her healing process not only kept her career alive but also endeared her to fans who saw in her not just a pop star, but a mirror of their own struggles. Miley Cyrus's personal challenges and public struggles remind us that celebrity is not an escape from pain, it is often a magnification of it. For every headline about her controversies, there was a real person wrestling with love, loss, addiction, and identity. And while the world judged her from a distance, she chose to stand in the fire and let it shape her into something stronger. This chapter of her life was not defined by perfection, but by endurance. It was about learning to survive when everything, home, love, stability, seemed to collapse around her. And it was about finding new ways to rise, even when the world was convinced she had already fallen. For Miley Cyrus, survival in the spotlight has always required more than talent, it has required control. After years of public scrutiny, personal turmoil, and the constant oscillation between shock and introspection, she began to take charge in a way that went beyond music and performance. She realized that to truly define herself, she needed to seize the narrative, to show the world who Miley Cyrus was on her own terms, both as an artist and as a human being. This was a period of conscious reinvention, a turning point where activism, artistry, and authenticity converged. One of the most significant avenues of this reinvention has been her activism. In 2014, Miley founded the Happy Hippie Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting homeless youth, LGBTQ+ communities, and other vulnerable populations. Her work with the foundation demonstrated a side of her that the media had rarely highlighted during the Bangerz era, the side of Miley that was thoughtful, empathetic, and deeply committed to social change. Through charity events, public appearances, and social media campaigns, she began using her platform to shed light on issues far beyond the entertainment industry, leveraging her fame for impact rather than mere spectacle. This period also marked a reinvention of her artistic identity. With each new release, Miley embraced genres and styles that reflected her evolving sensibilities. The 2020 album Plastic Hearts exemplified this evolution. Leaning heavily into rock, punk, and new wave influences, the album was both a tribute to the music that inspired her and a bold statement of independence. Collaborations with icons like Joan Jett and Billy Idol bridged the generational gap between her influences and her own generation of fans, cementing her status as an artist willing to break boundaries and experiment beyond pop conventions. Here, Miley wasn't chasing trends or chart dominance, she was asserting ownership over her sound, her image, and her message. The process of owning her narrative was not limited to music. Miley increasingly took control of her public image, framing her controversies and personal milestones on her own terms. In interviews and social media posts, she addressed cultural appropriation, openly discussed her struggles with identity and addiction, and clarified misconceptions about her relationships. By doing so, she reshaped the narrative from one dictated by tabloids to one filtered through her voice. For the first time in years, Miley was no longer reacting, she was directing, curating how she was seen and understood. Her public reinvention extended to fashion and visual identity as well. Gone were the outrageous props and twerking spectacles of the Bangerz era, replaced by a style that reflected both confidence and individuality. Her looks on the red carpet and in music videos fused rock and roll edge with nostalgic glam, and her wardrobe choices became an extension of her artistry. Each outfit, each photo shoot, each visual statement was deliberate, contributing to a narrative of authenticity and self-determination. Activism and artistic reinvention intersected in ways that were deeply personal. Songs such as Mother's Daughter celebrated empowerment and individuality while aligning with broader themes of female strength and self-expression. Meanwhile, Miley's social media presence became a platform for advocacy, from celebrating LGBTQ+ pride to raising awareness about climate change and mental health. Her willingness to address social issues, even when it risked alienating parts of her fan base, demonstrated a commitment to using her visibility responsibly. Yet, reinvention was not without its challenges. Critics often questioned whether her activism was performative, and debates about cultural sensitivity continued to follow her. Miley, however, acknowledged her missteps and openly discussed the learning curve she faced in navigating her influence responsibly. This transparency, rare in celebrity culture, further reinforced her evolution as someone willing to confront criticism, admit mistakes, and grow from them. This era also allowed Miley to reconcile the various facets of her public persona. The rebellious, provocative artist of the Bangerz era, the introspective singer-songwriter of Malibu, and the socially conscious advocate of the Happy Hippie Foundation all became threads in a larger tapestry, one that reflected a multidimensional individual rather than a single, marketable stereotype. By merging these facets, Miley demonstrated that reinvention doesn't mean erasing the past, it means integrating it into a more complete, self-directed identity. One of the most compelling aspects of this period is how it showcased her resilience. After years of intense media scrutiny, personal loss, and public criticism, Miley emerged with a voice that was unmistakably her own. She reclaimed ownership of her life, not by conforming to expectations, but by embracing her complexity and refusing to be boxed in. This reclamation extended to her music, her relationships, and her public persona. Everything became a reflection of her own choices and values. By this point, it was clear that Miley Cyrus was no longer defined by her controversies, her past, or even the shock value that had once dominated headlines. She had become an artist, activist, and individual who commanded respect not because of scandal, but because of her ability to evolve, learn, and express herself fully. In a world where public opinion can be both relentless and unforgiving, Miley's ability to own her narrative was a triumph, a declaration that she would no longer be shaped solely by external forces. In retrospect, this chapter of Miley's life is less about the external spectacle and more about internal mastery. She had survived childhood stardom, public ridicule, personal heartbreak, and countless challenges, emerging as someone who understood the power and responsibility of her voice. Her activism, artistic reinvention, and ownership of her narrative were not just milestones, they were proof of growth, resilience, and self-determination. Miley Cyrus's journey in this era reflects a broader truth about transformation. True reinvention requires courage, self-awareness, and the willingness to confront one's past while carving a path forward. It is messy, complicated, and often misunderstood. But for Miley, it was the moment she truly claimed her place, not as a former Disney star, not as a controversial headline, but as a fully realized, multidimensional artist and advocate. As Miley Cyrus navigated the aftermath of the Bangerz era, her reinvention, and the challenges of public scrutiny, she entered a phase defined by introspection, self-discovery, and the pursuit of personal authenticity. It was during this period that the interplay of love, identity, and personal growth became central to her story, a journey as intricate and compelling as any of her musical transformations. Miley's romantic life had always been under a microscope. From the early days of her on-screen romance with Liam Hemsworth to the more publicized entanglements that followed, every relationship was analyzed, dissected, and amplified. Yet, in this chapter of her life, she began to approach love not as a performance for the media, but as a path to understanding herself more deeply. Her relationships, though still intensely public, became less about spectacle and more about connection, learning, and personal reflection. Her reconciliation with Liam Hemsworth, which led to their brief marriage in 2018, was emblematic of this desire for stability and authenticity. For years, the two had shared a bond that had endured the tumult of Hollywood's pressures, familial expectations, and the intense scrutiny of fans. Their union, though fleeting, represented a commitment to growth and maturity, a willingness to try again, to learn from the past, and to navigate love with intention. While the eventual separation was painful, it provided Miley with insights into her own needs, boundaries, and capacity for resilience. At the same time, Miley's exploration of identity became increasingly complex. She openly discussed her fluidity, both in terms of sexuality and gender expression, challenging conventional norms and expectations. Her statements about embracing non-binary identity and celebrating sexual fluidity resonated with fans worldwide, offering a sense of visibility and affirmation for those navigating similar journeys. In a society that often demands rigid labels, Miley's openness was a radical act of self-acceptance, reflecting her broader commitment to authenticity over conformity. These explorations of identity were not just public declarations, they were deeply personal acts of growth. Miley's willingness to question norms and reject societal expectations mirrored the internal work she had undertaken over years of fame, criticism, and self-examination. She embraced vulnerability, acknowledging mistakes, insecurities, and the complexity of her emotions. Whether through interviews, social media posts, or music, she allowed audiences to witness her evolution in real time, breaking down the barriers between celebrity persona and human experience. Her artistry during this period mirrored these themes of love and identity. Plastic Hearts, released in 2020, was a sonic reflection of her journey. Blending rock, punk, and pop influences, the album explored heartbreak, empowerment, and self-definition. Tracks like Midnight Sky conveyed both independence and introspection, celebrating liberation while acknowledging past pain. Collaborations with icons such as Joan Jett further reinforce Miley's ability to integrate influence, experience, and mentorship into her evolving artistry, creating work that was both personally cathartic and culturally resonant. This period also marked a shift in how Miley engaged with her audience. No longer confined to the superficiality of tabloid narratives, she cultivated spaces where conversations about love, identity, and mental health could be authentic and nuanced. Social media became a tool for connection rather than controversy, and Miley increasingly used it to share lessons learned, advocate for marginalized communities, and encourage self-reflection. She was redefining celebrity influence, demonstrating that visibility could be leveraged to normalize complex human experiences rather than exploit them for scandal. The journey of personal growth, however, was not linear. Like any human experience, it was punctuated by setbacks, moments of doubt, and external pressures. Miley faced criticism for her evolving identity, with detractors often conflating fluidity with inconsistency. Yet, these challenges became catalysts for further self-awareness. Miley learned to assert her boundaries, embrace her truths unapologetically, and recognize that growth often requires discomfort, reflection, and resilience. Another key aspect of this era was Miley's reconciliation with her past selves. She acknowledged that each phase of her life, the child star, the rebellious Bangerz icon, the introspective Malibu singer, contributed to the person she had become. By integrating these experiences, she cultivated a sense of wholeness, embracing contradictions rather than suppressing them. This holistic understanding of self allowed her to approach love and personal relationships with greater clarity and intention, fostering connections rooted in honesty and mutual respect. Miley's commitment to personal growth also extended to her health and well-being. After years of intense scrutiny, unpredictable schedules, and lifestyle extremes, she began prioritizing balance, mental health, and sustainable practices. Interviews and public statements highlighted her focus on mindfulness, reflection, and emotional awareness. These steps reinforce the broader theme of the era: personal development is a lifelong process, one that requires both self-compassion and courage to confront one's vulnerabilities. Ultimately, this chapter of Miley Cyrus's life is defined by the intersection of love, identity, and personal growth. It is a narrative of self-discovery shaped by triumphs, failures, public scrutiny, and intimate revelations. Through heartbreak, exploration, and self-expression, Miley has demonstrated that authenticity is not static, it evolves, matures, and deepens over time. She has embraced the complexity of being human, showing that growth often emerges from the very challenges that once threatened to define or confine us. By navigating the complexities of love, exploring the fluidity of identity, and committing to personal growth, Miley Cyrus emerged as an artist and individual capable of transcending the constraints of fame. Her journey underscores a universal truth: transformation is rarely clean or linear, but it is always possible for those willing to confront themselves honestly and courageously. As this era of her life unfolded, Miley was no longer reacting to the world around her. Instead, she was shaping it, through music, activism, public discourse, and personal example. She had moved beyond the spectacle, embracing authenticity as her guiding principle. And in doing so, she laid the foundation for the next phase of her evolution, a phase defined by empowerment, legacy, and the continued pursuit of truth in both art and life. As Miley Cyrus's journey comes full circle, it is clear that her story is one of continuous evolution, an arc that spans childhood fame, rebellion, introspection, and reinvention. From her early days as Hannah Montana to her provocative Bangerz era, her softer introspective periods, and finally to her role as a mature artist and activist, Miley has demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt while remaining fundamentally herself. This final chapter is not about shock or controversy, it is about reflection, legacy, and the mark she leaves on music, culture, and fans around the world. Miley's impact on music is undeniable. She has traversed genres: pop, country, rock, punk, hip-hop influences, and has consistently used her voice to explore personal narratives, emotional honesty, and creative experimentation. Each reinvention was deliberate, a reflection of who she was at that moment, yet always leaving traces of her past selves. By embracing change, she redefined what it means to grow up in the public eye, proving that a child star can evolve into an influential adult artist without losing authenticity. Her albums, from Bangerz to Plastic Hearts, are testaments to this ongoing transformation, blending personal storytelling with broader cultural resonance. Beyond her music, Miley's cultural impact is equally significant. She challenged industry norms about gender, sexuality, and artistic expression, inspiring conversations about identity and empowerment. Her openness regarding sexual fluidity and non-binary identity provided representation for millions who had felt invisible or misunderstood. She addressed criticism, acknowledged mistakes, and used her platform to highlight marginalized communities, particularly through the Happy Hippie Foundation, demonstrating that celebrity can be a tool for social change rather than mere entertainment. Miley's legacy is also a lesson in resilience. Her life and career have been punctuated by intense public scrutiny, personal hardships, and societal expectations that often seemed impossible to navigate. Yet she continuously turned adversity into growth, using challenges as catalysts for reinvention. From heartbreaks to substance struggles, from media backlash to creative risks, Miley transformed obstacles into opportunities, building a narrative of perseverance and self-discovery that resonates far beyond the confines of pop culture. Her journey reflects a broader truth about fame and identity. True transformation is rarely linear, often messy, and always ongoing. Miley's story teaches that authenticity is not about perfection, but about embracing complexity, making mistakes, learning, and continuing to evolve. She has shown that it is possible to be controversial, vulnerable, rebellious, introspective, and socially conscious, all at the same time. This multifaceted nature is what makes her both relatable and iconic, a figure whose influence extends across generations of fans and artists. As a performer, activist, and public figure, Miley Cyrus leaves a legacy of courage. She redefined the expectations of what it means to grow up in Hollywood, proving that reinvention is not just an artistic choice but a vital part of personal survival. Her ability to blend music, advocacy, and personal narrative sets her apart, establishing a blueprint for other artists seeking authenticity in an industry that often rewards conformity. In the end, Miley Cyrus is more than the sum of her headlines. She is an artist who has navigated fame with a rare combination of audacity, introspection, and self-determination. She is a cultural force whose voice has influenced music, fashion, activism, and social discourse. And she is a human being whose story reminds us that growth, identity, and self-expression are lifelong journeys, never fixed, always unfolding. This is the final transformation, a woman who has embraced every chapter of her life, child stardom, rebellion, heartbreak, experimentation, advocacy, and reinvention, and integrated it into a narrative of resilience and authenticity. Miley Cyrus stands as a living example of how an individual can navigate the extremes of fame, confront personal challenges, and emerge not only as a successful artist but as a symbol of evolution, empowerment, and cultural influence. As the screen fades and the music swells, the story of Miley Cyrus reminds us that transformation is not a destination, but a journey, a continuous act of becoming, learning, and daring to be fully oneself. Her legacy is complete, yet ever-expanding, a testament to the power of resilience, artistry, and courage in the face of life's relentless spotlight.